To set up our today's conversation, I just wanted to give you a brief background of what we do at NBCU Launch before we jump into our conversation with talented director Maureen Bharoocha. NBCU Launch helps propel the company forward in creating modern, inclusive, and nuanced stories that reflect our world. We work across the entertainment, television, streaming networks, so that's NBC Broadcast, the cable networks, which is Oxygen, USA, Sci-Fi, E, and then we also cover our streaming platform, Peacock. In addition, we work under the Universal Studio Group, which creates programs not only for our platforms, but for external networks and streamers like Hulu, Apple, Disney+. So here's a little, we'll run the sizzle to give you a quick look of what we do. As I mentioned before, because we sit under our entertainment networks as well as the studio, there's tons of opportunities that we can give our program participants in terms of staffing, in terms of getting booked on shows as a director. So segue into, let's meet Maureen. Maureen started her career with her short film Abaji that shot on the streets of Karachi, Pakistan. It premiered at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival in 2009. So you have such a great background. So you worked at Sprinkles Cupcakes at their stores. Your bosses saw your films. You convinced them to go into the shorts business, and you wrote and directed 10 shorts based on their flavors. That's so great. And then she had a feature debut, which was an arm wrestling comedy called Golden Arm, which starred Mary Holland, Dot Marie Jones, and Ron Funches, and HBO acquired that. Her second feature film was The Prank, which starred Rita Moreno and premiered at South by last year. Maureen also spent 3 seasons as a segment director on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and has directed over 50 shorts and commercial spots. So let's just talk about your diverse background in terms of your experience. How did you get into directing? What was your trajectory in terms of directing?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, again, in a kind of crazy big family. My mom's Irish Catholic, my dad's Indian, Pakistani, Muslim, Burmese, and I always had tons, I'm the oldest, so I always had tons of cousins. So I was always organizing them in plays and making videos. And so I always thought I was gonna be an actor, actually. I did theater all through high school and college. And then in college I took a film class. So I was like, oh, I really wanna do film. So it ended up just being watching movies and TV and kind of be as creative as possible. So I went to film school, I did film studies undergrad, and then I did, not that you have to go to film school, then I went and got my master's in film production. So I think it was just my love of the craft. I wanted to study everything I could, whether it was, theater or, design and art. And I do think that growing up, I was always good at a lot of things, but not great at one thing.
Right.
But now when I look at it, I'm like, oh, I was actually learning the languages that I needed to do to be a great director. Because I loved photography and I loved art. And so it was all of it coming together was actually what you need to be a great director.
Yeah. Coming from an AAPI family, what was their thoughts when you decided that you wanted to become a creative or become a director?
I think in my family, my mom is an artist. So on the Irish side, it was she's a painter, so they're kind of kooky. And I think my dad grew up in Burma, and I think everyone always said he was gonna go to America and be in Hollywood. Uh-huh. So I think he kind of even though he's you should pick something that's better, I think he secretly loved it. And then my dad's mom was oh, that's not good. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
So I feel like it was a little bit all over the map, but my parents were really good at, I said what I wanted to do and they just kind of supported me.
Yeah.
And so I also didn't really give them a choice. I wasn't can I do this? I was I'm doing this.
Exactly.
And so they just kind of got on board.
But that just shows your tenacity as a director, knowing what you want and striving for that and achieving that. So as part of the Female Forward Directing Program, our program aims to give female directors, as well as directors from underrepresented groups, the access and the opportunity to work on NBCU shows. As part of the program, each director shadows on 2 episodes of a series, and they are different from other programs out there. Our aim is to give them the opportunity to actually direct. So as part of the program, they shadow on 2 episodes of a series and then get a guaranteed directing assignment on that series. It's different from other programs out there because, like a lot of the other programs offer just shadow opportunities. Like our goal is to, what happens after the shadow? We want to make sure that not only are we giving our directors access, but we're also giving them the opportunity and really bolstering up their resume beyond the program, because post-program is what's key. So in terms of your experience, you shadowed on 2 episodes of Superstore. Unfortunately, because it's Hollywood, the show got canceled, and you directed on Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, I mean, I think the program was so at me, and that's the thing. My point up into the program was a lot of work. Like you said, I came out of film school. I had my film Abaji that kind of did the festival circuit. I came to LA during the last writer's strike when there were no jobs. So it took me in that weird path. I worked at Sprinkles Cupcakes. They saw my thesis film. I convinced them to create a position in the company, and I made branded content for 8 years for them, right. Short films, doc stuff. I did 2 Lifetime movies that I co-wrote that were thrillers. I did stuff for UCB. I did short comedies for that. I did College Humor. I left Sprinkles technically for Kimmel, and I did 3 years of segment directing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is the best gig in town, but it wasn't storytelling. And even after all of that, I couldn't break into episodic. So I'd had my 10,000 hours. I had so much work. I'd had 2 features at that point, 3 features before I had even gotten to do episodic. And so what the program did is it just unlocked something that was really hard. It's just hard to break into TV. So it gave me access, and it gave me the ability to kind of, meet those people that you need to meet. And, shadowing to have an episode was really incredible. And what was kind of cool about the Superstore getting canceled was I got to see how that show worked. Right. And I got to shadow Betsy Thomas and Victor Nelly, which are incredible TV directors, and see how that worked. And then when that show got canceled, it was, a bummer. But what was really cool is that NBC was so great is they just submitted me to other shows. Yep. So I got to meet and basically just interview on other shows. And it happened to be that I connected with Tracy Wigfield when I met on Saved by the Bell. And she was just like, you seem really cool, and Saved by the Bell so well, because it was my favorite show as a kid. And so she's like, yeah, you could be on the show. Right. So it actually kind of ended up being a little blessing in disguise that I didn't get to direct on the show that I shadowed. Right. Because I just came in afterwards, and they were like, oh yeah, and I came off doing the prank and went right into Saved by the Bell. So it ended up being kind of a blessing. So
she shadowed on 2 episodes of Superstore, she directed Saved by the Bell, and then from there she was able to direct on our Pitch Perfect Bunburn Berlin series for Peacock, and then also NBC's Grand Crew. In terms of, and you could tell she's not busy at all doing all those things. In terms of all of your skill set, doing shorts, doing features, doing branded content, was it easy for you to translate those skills into episodic TV?
Yeah, I think one thing that's was so hard, I think, to break into episodic, and there's that thing where they always want you to have the thing that you don't have. Right. It's I did 3 years of segment directing, and it's well, that's not technically storytelling. I'm I've done features. Well, TV's faster than features. So it's oh, okay. Then it's I have shorts, I have content. So at first it's they want you to be we don't have episodic, so you need episodic to have episodic. But yes, all the skills that I learned on, Jimmy Kimmel Live is one of the best things in town, but it is a grind. It's you wake up at 10, you get your assignment, you hit the ground running, you're casting, you're shooting, you're getting your cut to the editors by 2, 3, you're getting a cut to Jimmy at 3:34 at the latest, because he'll have notes, you go back and forth, and you're live at 5 and you're done. So just being able to work at that speed, that helped me in TV, because TV's a little slower than that. I think also, working in features, that gave me a much better sense of post and color and score, so you're having kind of a vision for what's next. And so I think in TV, you also have to, as a director in episodic, you're a guest in their home. So you have to figure out the situation, the crew, kind of immediately. Like, how do I get people on my side to understand my vision in like a day? You know, because you're only there, especially in a half an hour episodic, you're only there for like a week. You know, you're not there for a very long time. So how do you get people to translate your vision, get on board with you, and inspire them when they're strangers?
Exactly. So what are your secret tips for getting, you know, the crew and the actors on board, given that you are just, you know, an episodic guest director on their show? Yeah,
I mean, again, I think to me everything does stem from my real true love of movies and TV. So, you know, it depends. Like, I think this is also kind of, at first growing up, it was always hard being mixed. You're like, oh, I don't really fit into one culture or the other, and I'm always trying to fit into one. And so I do think now that is my superpower, because now I can go into any room and be like, how do we connect? How can I connect with them? Whether it's on a cultural level, whether it's on movies, you know, so usually like old salty guys, it's like, okay, we're gonna talk about old movies that I've seen, and they're gonna be like, you've seen that movie? I'm like, yes. I went to film studies. I'm like, I know the deep cuts. So then you kind of win them over, you know, and then it's like, you just kind of assess. So I think like that's one thing, is just like, how do you really truly personally connect with somebody? Two, I think it's the prep. Mm-hmm. You know, you just really prep, you figure out your inspos, like your comps, and then you get people excited. And that's kind of what I did with Grand Crew. It's like, okay, they've been working for 3 months. I'm coming in for this 2 weeks. Right. How do I make it fresh and exciting? And it's coming in with ideas that are not too complicated, that are going to be like, oh no, our days are going to be long, but that are going to be like, oh, that's fun, we haven't thought of that, or like, that's a different kind of thing that we can do that still fits into the language of the show.
And it's a talk about that. It's like, it's a fine line of putting in your own creative stamp on the show, but still working along the confines of the episode or the series that the template they've already made for the series.
Yeah.
Like, talk about that.
Like, I have a TV mentor, Todd Holland, who's amazing, and I'll steal his quote. He always says, like, your job as an episodic director is to emulate and elevate, you know? So know the voice of the show, know kind of what they do, but then always kind of bring something that you can bump it up, that you can give a little bit extra. And again, that analogy that he also uses, you know, you're coming into somebody else's kitchen to make a meal. So you have all their ingredients, and you have to use everything that they have. So it's not really your home, but you're kind of making your own thing in their kitchen. I also think that was one thing working on Kimmel that really taught me that was, you know, you have to do something in somebody else's voice. Right. You know, I am not Jimmy Kimmel. You know, we don't share necessarily the same sense of humor always, but I had to do segments and bits and commercials and work with celebrities in his voice. Mm-hmm. And I had to also be like, trust myself, because if you're second guessing, like, is this what Jimmy like? Would he like this? Would he like this? You'll always fail. Right. So you just have to be confident that, like, I can get it. And sometimes you make a misstep and, you know, it's like it falls flat and it doesn't work. But I think it's just like trusting your gut that, like, you know their voice, you know the show, and you know what you can do within the confines of that.
Was that something that that you learned in time, just getting that confidence to, like, trust your gut? Like, just coming in as an episodic director, like, for the first time, you're like, oh my God, you're a deer in headlights. Like, just getting that confidence, did that take time for you to, develop? I think the stress of how crazy Kimmel is, that nothing compares to the fast-paced, like, really high pressure of that. Right. So coming into episodic, it's kind of like, this is fun. It's a roller coaster. You're like, okay, we're gonna make our day. We'll, like, you have so much more time from Kimmel and then less time that you have in features. I also think that Sprinkles did that for me too. It's like working in, sometimes it's nice to have those confines because you can be more creative and when you have restrictions. Right. Sometimes I struggle when I have my own projects and I'm doing my own movies that you can do everything and you're like, oh. But it's sometimes nice to have those, like, barriers. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years? Like, what is that ultimate goal for Maureen? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, I love directing, I love storytelling, I love visual storytelling. Mm-hmm. I'm much more of a movie person, so movies is really my love and what I focus on. But that being said, I want to do pilots, and I have so many friends that have great shows, so I'd like to do shows here and there that, like, speak to me, that are just, like, fun. Totally. I really love working, so I like making cool shit. So kind of whatever form that comes in. But, my personal thing is creating television shows about where I come from. Right. In my weird family, and then also doing studio features eventually, too. That's awesome. Well, let's go talk about what we came to talk about, Grand Crew. So let's get into your episode. So if you're unfamiliar with the show, Grand Crew is a hangout comedy that revolves around a group of friends who navigate the ups and downs of life and love in LA. It stars Nicole Byer and Echo Kellum. In the episode that you directed, Wine and Honors, Anthony receives an award from his alma mater. Sherm has the opportunity to have a dinner with a renowned businessman. And then Nikki helps Faye with a yard sale, and they lose something really important. And through all of that, there's tons of wine, thus Grand Crew. So from my understanding, let's talk about just prep. You usually get the script, you have 5 days before shoot. Like, what goes on in your prep?
Yeah. I mean, let's give a good shout out to the writers. It starts with the script.
Right.
Yes, Shanovia Large wrote the script. She's incredible. I loved working with her. And Phil Jackson, it's his show. So it's really like getting that script, getting to kind of dig into it, kind of breaking it down, talking to Phil. Prep for a show is like you're doing a concept meeting where you're talking to Phil and you're learning about his vision of like how he sees the show. You're talking to Shanovia and like asking any questions. And then you're basically, for me, I'm breaking down each scene. I've done my prep as far as like watching other episodes. I always ask to read all the scripts before. If I can't watch a cut of the show like this season, I'm reading the other things. And then you're basically, to me, I'm hitting the ground running with my comps and my references. I like to take each scene and there's a lot of like montages in my episode. So I was like, how do I make each montage feel a little different? Yeah. Or how do I, what is this scene trying to say? And that's, again, talking back to the writer. Like, what are we trying to convey in the scene? And that's how I break it down. I also break down character. Right. So it's like, okay, what's this character's arc? Like my episode, Aaron and Nicole are kind of or Aaron and Gracie were kind of the two main storylines. So it's like focusing on how do I make my shot lists and my prep in mind with their storylines? How do I carry their story through?
Awesome. So one of the best parts of Grand Crew is the cast. They're hilarious. As a comedy director, you need to be able to balance that comedic energy, but also get the shot. The whole logistics of the technical aspect of being a director. Let's go to our first clip, where we see the crew hype up Anthony before his gala, and then we'll talk about it. Great job. So how did you, first of all, approach filming that scene? Like, what was like the blocking? What was, your shot list?
Well, what's fun is like, when you get your episode, you scout, right? So you scout the location. This is a set on the lot. And you kind of go, okay, where can we put the camera? Where do we want the characters to go? So I scout, and then you do your prep of like where you're gonna put the cameras, how many setups you're gonna do. And what's funny about this scene is the original way that I like thought about it in my head. I'm like, oh, they're sitting down. I had an idea where I wanted them to sit, so that when you're doing your rehearsal, you can tell the actors, I would like you to sit here, I'd like you to sit here, and then Anthony will come in. So we kind of lit everything, and we did it all that way. And then the guys were like, yeah, I like sitting, and they're like, it's gonna be a little tough in our tuxedos. So we set it up, we rehearsed it, them sitting. We did one take, and I instantly was like, it's wrong. This feels wrong. This feels all wrong. And I went to the DP, Rick, and I was like, Rick, I'm sorry. They have to stand. So we had to adjust all the lighting, because I was like, immediately, it's like trusting your gut. Like, it didn't feel right. And I was like, in that moment, you're like, okay, we set up all the lights. It took all this time. We have all the cameras. And so in that moment, I'm like, I could instantly change it, or I could just be like, I guess. I'm so glad that I trusted my gut. And they did it that way, and they were like, that felt so much better. So it's kind of that kind of thing where you could prep. You're like prepping, you're making all your shot lists, how the angles are gonna work. The actors come in and they change it in rehearsal. You're like, I wanna stand over here. And you're like, that's cool. And then when they listen to me, they're like, okay, we'll sit. I immediately, with one take, I was like, nope. And then the scene came alive. Right. The energy was much better. They were more comfortable, and we kind of did that fun staggered thing. So it's like, okay, we can have a singles of the guys by the door, and then Echo and Carl, they're always gonna live in that too, because they're never really having one line. So it's kind of just like figuring out your coverage and the best way to have the energy for the scene.
Awesome. Another challenge of being a director is, translating what's on the script to the screen. we have the next clip. We're showing a hilarious scene with like Nikki helping Faye, rack up some money during this yard sale. We'll just go to the second clip. What went into the entire montage and getting that, the words off the paper onto like the screen and making it funny?
Yeah, so this is one of those scenes I think that like is actually answering a lot of the questions that we talked about before. Because having the concept meeting with Phil, it's like, how do you see this? Like, what do you want to take out of this? And he was like, I want it to be fun and that they're having great times together. So when you have your concept meeting, my concept for this was, this is the first of 3 montages. And I was like, how do we make each montage different? Right. And so for this one, my comp reference was Boogie Nights. I was like, oh, it'd be fun if the camera's always moving. Again, our Grand Crew version of Boogie Nights montage. And so that's kind of what I like pitched him in the concept meeting. He's like, oh, I never thought I would hear a Boogie Nights reference in Grand Crew. But I was like, yeah, the camera will always be moving. So I had the video references. I was like, this is what I'm thinking. And the same thing, so we're on set with Shinovia, who wrote the episode, talking about like, this is what I think, and she was just like so excited. And so then it also got like Nicole and Gracie excited, and then the crew excited. I'm showing them like, okay, this is what we're thinking. The camera's never still. We're always gonna be moving from one shot to the next, and it's gonna be pushes, and it's gonna be like swipes, and we're gonna be, we even had that shot where they're doing the shoe thing. Like that's like a reference to a different world, right. Like the kind of the opening. And so it was always moving and being fun and like adding to the comedy. And so it really did get everybody excited on set, because it's not often that you get to shoot on location. Yeah. And so it was like location, we had like dollies, we had like handheld stuff, and everybody was kind of, again, it was like, okay. And then once we showed everybody the references, everybody got excited to try it and to try new things and to go fast. So it really was like, let's take this idea of it being something that we liked before from Boogie Nights and then make our own version and kind of inspiring everybody in a way that was maybe unusual for, Grand Crew.
Yep. Let's just like unpack Grand Crew. Just like having Phil Augusta Jackson, who is the EP, who is a person of color, like how was that? Like to just see him at the helm, seeing your cast who are all African American actors. Like, how did that feel for you to be a director on that type of show?
I mean, truly, like, again, like I happen to know Nicole and Carl from back in my UCB days. So just to be able to be on set with them and to have Phil be kind of just leading the charge and being so supportive. And then not only it's like Phil and the cast, it's the crew too. And it truly was the most diverse crew that I'd ever been on set with. And it was just like really incredible because everybody's supporting each other. You never feel like you have to like tiptoe. Right. So there's just like an inherent trust, and that we're all kind of making that same thing, and that we're telling something that maybe has never been told before or gotten to be seen. So it's just kind of exciting in a really, it wasn't necessarily anything specific, but I think just the feeling of like, wow, it's like, this is it. Like, this is like, whether it's camera, whether it's costumes, it's everything across the board is kind of going into Phil's vision. And then also the fact that like it is so important to him, and that it's something that's so important to me. So to be able to work for somebody like that and to help someone, create their vision, especially like for his show, it was just really like meaningful.
Exactly. And like, I'm not going to even underestimate this. It's like, I feel like Grand Crew is groundbreaking, and just having an all African American cast, like since A Different World, like I can't even think of another show since then, like on broadcast television, and to have an EP who is of color, I think it's amazing. It's really groundbreaking, and like people just tend to underestimate it. Does anyone have any questions for Maureen? I think we have some microphones in the back.
We're small, maybe we can just.
Yeah, just you could. Yes.
I think she back there had her hand up first.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
I do have a question about, because the show is about Black American culture and our podcast, I'm curious how you ensure that, as someone who may have come from that community, or that identity, how do you ensure that that was still an authentic storytelling experience for talent and like stay true to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think like one thing, again, it starts with Phil. It's his show. He's the showrunner. He's the head writer. It's all about him. And so what he kind of had, which was really cool, he basically, when you kind of come on as a director, he had this kind of like mood board. And it was like, these are the goals of the show. It's specifically, we want to make sure we're targeting like Black men and wine lovers. And like, it was like a whole thing of kind of his thesis. So it was really amazing to get to read that before I even dug into the script to like understand what he was trying to do. I mean, and that being said, and again, in episodic, directors are intimately working with the writer. The writer is producing their episode. So Shinovia was on set the whole time. She is like a newer writer, so they also had another writer, Erin Jennings, who was really incredible. So anything that I ever had questions about, I could ask them about, or it's her words too. So she's going to be there to make sure that we're doing it in the authentic way. Then the actors, I'm gonna defer to them. I'm not gonna, and then there's also somebody on set doing a sommelier. So every little detail there is somebody there to make sure that it's authentic. And then also the thing about Grand Crew, is the specifics are about wine and black men and women, but the stories are universal. So you're tapping into stuff, I think, thematically that I can relate to. This episode was about having imposter syndrome. And especially for women and people of color, we all can relate to that. So it's tapping into what are the themes of this episode and being able to draw from my own experiences, which also helps. So I think there's lots of different things, and juggling that all at the same time I think is really important to be aware of.
And then from a DEI perspective, it's important for us, this is our job to make sure that the room is filled with writers that, could tell that story authentically. Having Black writers in the writers' room is really important if they're telling a story about a group of African American friends. It needs to be authentic, because in the past, we would be telling these stories, but no one in the writers' room reflected that story. Reflected the culture that we were trying to portray. So in terms of NBCU launch, it's really important for us to make sure that all of our shows, whether it be in the writer's room, crew, executive producers, they do reflect the story that we're trying to tell authentically and respectfully.
And what's really cool too, I think, is so often in the past it has been people of color, there's one, there's a woman, there's an Asian person, there's a Black person. Yeah. And so to be able to have a show that is predominantly Black, writers and crew, and again, and then other represented people, in addition to, a lot of people came from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So it's a great mix. It's just really powerful.
Did anyone go ahead?
How involved are you in post as episodic director? How involved are you?
So that's the thing I think that is so different in features and TV, is in TV you're not really involved in post. And so, you do your cut, you have your certain days, I think you get 3 days to do your director's cut in TV, and then you're gone. And so I do have a lot of TV director friends that don't know anything about post, and it kind of blows my mind as a director, because they don't, unless you're a producing director, you're not really on, because you're probably off to another show. Right. And so that really does end up being the showrunner that takes that episode and takes it all the way to the end. So you're not in color design or sound design or a score or anything like that on an episodic.
Do you plan your shoot to reflect that? When you're on set, obviously you have a writer there to work with, but
Yeah.
are you shooting extra coverage to make sure that they have pieces, or how does that work then to set it up for those?
I think that's the tricky thing, right? It is, you want to make sure that you're getting what you want, but I wouldn't say safety, but I would say, you want to get levels on performance, because you just never know if, there's going to be a studio note that's do we have one that's with them doing this? And you're oh no, if I didn't get that, you're going to be Maureen didn't get the stuff we needed, even though you're So you do a little bit of safety. And you do especially if I'm doing an episode of TV, if I have some kind of cool shot. I did this on Bumper in Berlin. I had this really special shot that I wanted, but I did a safety because I was I know it's a bold choice. I hope that I'll put it in my director's cut and show them how I want it to be, but it ended up being taken out, and I was you have that other way that you shot it just in case. And you can't do that for everything, because then you would just lose your days and shoot everything. So I think it depends. If you have something that maybe feels like an outlier type of thing, make sure you get an alt, and then again, you're always getting levels on the performance so that You just never know if there's these notes that are going to come down. So I do think as an episodic director, you are doing a little bit of like, not band-aiding, but you're like, this is how I want it, and I'm going to put that in my cut. But I'm going to get just alternate variations so that they have enough to work with after I'm done. And that's what's kind of fun about episodic. You're like, what did they leave in? Or like, oh, they left most of my director's cut in. Sweet. Like, you know, and so that's why you really want to get your director's cut to a place that you feel like this is what I want.
Do you ever see it before it goes on air?
I have, yeah. And, you know, sometimes you're just like, oh, they took out the thing that I like, you know, or, yeah, or you're like, that doesn't make sense, you know. But also the things I think I like is like, I love to actually see my episode of what they've cut for time. Right. And I'm like, oh, those are smart cuts. You know, they lifted a scene. Like, actually, in this episode, we shot a whole different cold open. And it's not in there. I'm like, we spent all that day shooting that, and it's a different cold open.
I have a question for you. Is it a big challenge for you to get over, you know, like when you're doing your shorts or you're doing your features, you are in control of that project from, you know, top to bottom. Like, as an episodic director, you're just in for that episode and then you're out. Like, is it a challenge for you to like just get rid of that control?
I don't think it's a challenge, but I do think, though, I think of it as a different type of directing. And I think that maybe comes from doing, you know, Kimmel on sketch and features and branded content and shorts, that those are all different mediums, kind of, or different styles of directing. So I do see feature directing and television directing a little bit different. I mean, unless you're doing the pilot, which you are the creative vision behind the pilot. But if you're coming in, it's kind of a fun challenge because you're like, I'm learning the structure and the rules of the show. Right. And then how do I, again, help you create your vision and work within your framework? So I think of it as a little bit different style of directing.
What do you prefer?
Features. I want to be in charge. I want to be the vision. But it's fun, too, to work with your friends and like come in and have that challenge. So I think it's like a fun challenge.
That's awesome. Oh, go ahead.
I just flew in today. I didn't get to see anything. I just flew in today, so I didn't get to see it.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, both of you coming in, for you all to recognize the friggin' genius she is.
Oh, thanks.
Okay? So then my question is, if you go to make a film, your own film, whatever, what would you do with dark material? Because last night was so powerful and so subtle and so beautiful in so many ways, but it's dark. In the end, there's Sadie, but it's a dark story. What can you do with dark material about a minority group? And that kind of plays into what we were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is that my lane right now is comedy, but I do a lot of dark stuff. So a lot of my own work is very dark. I just, you know, comedy was the thing that like became the lane that I had to travel to get further faster. So, no, not necessarily it doesn't sell well, but like once you start working, people are like, you do this. So it's harder to sometimes change lanes. So that's why when I work on my own stuff, it's darker, or, you know, I usually do dark comedy or like a hybrid. But I do think, like, to me, the things that I love that are dark always have levity. You know, there has to be light and darkness in everything. So, you know, all my dark stuff does have some lightness, and all my comedy has darkness. And I think the thing you're talking about maybe is the difference is maybe not always focusing on the trauma. So it's like having a balance. You want some dark stuff, but you want to make sure that there's enough, you know, underrepresented people, stories of joy. And I think that's like where we're at, where a lot of people want to show the joy, and they want to show the layers, that it's not just about trauma or fitting in or like being a model minority, you know. And again, that's for me too. It's like there's lots of trauma, but there's also lots of joy and fun. So I want to be able to balance and show that in all the layers that is.
So on the set, since you have so many people who have improv backgrounds, I would assume that there are moments where it feels like there's moments of improvisation. How, as an episodic director, do you on those moments? Are you working with the writer to see how they feel about it, or how to?
Yeah, I mean, different shows are different. So, on Saved by the Bell, there's not a lot of improv. Like, Tracy's like, on the page is what's on the page, and not everybody was strong improvisers. So I think there's like, let's not waste a bunch of time trying stuff. That being said, there's always alt comedy lines that the writers are coming up with, and each show kind of in comedy has their own version. I think like Superstore was like a grab bag. They're like, what's in the grab bag? And then here it's called like extra grapes. So, the writers will come up. I mean, yes, there's definitely room for like improv here because you have, comedic geniuses. So you're going to be like, let's do a fun run, or like, this one's fun for you. And sometimes they're like, I don't want to do a fun run. I just want to get the script done and go home. Like, it depends on the vibe. But they're always going to do alt comedy lines. So whenever you do a scene like, great, we got what we want, what's the extra grapes? So we might do, again, Shinovia, the writer, is sitting right next to me at Village, and she's like, I like this one. She's like, I like this one. Let's try both. And so then you have those alt jokes as well in there. And then again, sometimes Nicole will be like, she'll go on a run, and you're like, great, let's let her go on a run, or Carl. Like, so it just kind of depends. It depends on time, how much, cushion you have. If you're running late, you're like, let's just get what we need and go. But that's why you always want to be making sure you have a little bit of extra padding, because you want to be able to like have some more fun. Yeah.
Did this show have a producing director, and so how did you work with that person?
The show did not have a producing director. But I would say that Rick Page, the DP, I mean, he's kind of probably like the through line. I mean, because he's the visual, he's on all the episodes, shooting all of them. So he was like a great person just to, if I was like, oh, does this make sense in the language of the show? Sometimes he'd be like, no, or let's try it. There's also Matt, who is the producer on the episode throughout. So he's somebody you can also talk to. On Pitch, we did have a producing director, but that was a little different because it was the first season, 6 episodes, and there wasn't the language of the show yet. So on that show, Megan Amran was like, do whatever you want, like, be creative. I was like, cool. So I think it depends. A lot of times there isn't a producing director, and to me, that's just like more of my job to like talk to other directors. So and whenever I get on a show, I usually have friends on that show. So I'll call them, I'll be like, what's the deal? Like, who do I have to like have extra time with? Or, what's the vibe of the set? So it's my job as much to connect with my community of directors to be like, what's the deal?
Awesome. So just in terms of, one more last question, in terms of, did someone have a question? Oh, go ahead.
It sounds like you have like your own projects that you're working on at the same time, like you're doing all these like side things, and like I don't know if you're working on other kind of content and stuff, but how do you balance like that time and like having brain power to be creative in your work and be creative in your own like personal project at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, I think it's weird. I think it does go back to being kind of like mixed. That if I'm working on a comedy thing, I'm trying to work on a drama thing because I don't want one part of my brain to get atrophied. So it is like if I'm doing the show, I'm working on my own thing because I'm always wanting to keep in my sightline what my goal is, because sometimes you can get lost. You can start to do episodic and you're like, now I'm an episodic director and I'm a journeyman and I'm doing TV episode after episode, and now I've lost sight. So for me, it's just like my own like drive, I think, just to make sure that I'm continuing to push myself and to do new things and to make sure that I have like what my ultimate goal is still in my sight.
You asked the wrong person that question, because she's always working from branded content, feature, shorts, and episodic.
I have a hard time saying no.
Great. If no one has any questions, I think just want to thank everybody for coming out today. Oh, 10 minutes. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So you said that you moved to LA when you wanted to get into the industry, and we're in San Francisco right now. And so people who are not in LA, like how do they get involved at all? Or like what is the path?
Yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate thing is you just have to make stuff, right? And even for me, like, when I, again, came out to LA during the last writer's strike, and I support the strike right now, I came into a time when there were no jobs. Like, I came to LA, literally I came out of film school in 2007. I had an internship on CSI, I worked as a post-PA on Alexander Payne movie, and I was like, sweet, this is gonna translate. And then there was nothing for a year. And it got me that job at Sprinkles. And what it did was, it's basically, I was being a PA, and I only did PA work for like a year, and I was like, you know what, this isn't gonna get me where I wanna go, I just have to make my own stuff. So I think the great thing that we have now is that you don't have to be in LA to start off. I do think you have to come to LA at some point and face the beast. You just do. Or New York, wherever that beast is, you have to like go to the industry town. But I do think that doesn't stop you from making great stuff here. I mean, that's also gonna be stuff that's different that you know, everybody's making movies in LA or shorts. So it's like you have a different location, you have different vibes, like you can tell the story of where you're from. And so it's just really about doing the thing that you want to do. And I think like doing it once and failing, doing it again. You know, I did like so many shorts and so many bad things that, you know, you just get your 10,000 hours on your reps in, and you just keep making stuff, and you just will never take no for an answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Robert, this is really a question for you. So I'm not a director, I'm a producer, and I've noticed that a lot of these diversity talent development programs don't have programs for producers. So, and that is a big gap because, you know, whether it be create our own projects or we come in on projects. Do you know of initiatives or ways that producers can get that done?
So the PGA in particular, yeah, they have their producers program. You know, for us, it's a challenge because the trajectory to become producer is writing then direct. You know, like it's a different trajectory. So we're just focused right now on the writing and the directing side. But definitely, I think the PGA has their own program. Yeah.
I also think like so much of coming up for me, the reason I didn't do assistant jobs or anything is that always seemed to lead to producing, right? Like you become an assistant somewhere, you move up, you become, you know, and then it's like, then you're producing. There isn't really that same trajectory for directing, right. You know, unless you want to be an AD. The DGA has a program that you can do for AD and then get up that way. So, but yeah, I think the PGA does do one. They stopped doing it. Okay. Interesting.
We'll revisit
yeah,
that.
I'm a part of the DGA Asian committee, and we talk very closely with the PGA Asian committee. Actually, I should ask my PGA friends about that.
We're talking about, you know, using movie nights as a reference. How, you know, with the pace of television and all that, how involved do your pitches get for what you want to do with the show? Like, are you creating pitch decks? Is it more just a conversation? Like, how do you prep the showrunner to do what you want to do and convince them, you know, in addition to all the research of watching the show?
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone's different. I'm such like a visual person. It's funny, I had stuff to show you guys and we couldn't show it, but I do probably more prep than normally that like maybe TV, and that's only because when I've come in with my decks and stuff, they're like, wow, you have like a mood board for the scene, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's easy for me to pull pictures. And then, but it always is like art department's like, wow, thank you, or like, this is so helpful. So what I do for prep is, again, I maybe overdo stuff. I do like an overhead, so I know what my shots and where my cameras are gonna be for setups. Then I'll do a little shot list, and then I personally like to do a little like a storyboard like thing. I use scriptation. I've gone completely into scriptation. I don't do paper anymore. So that's also really easy to bring in photos. So, you know, we had the Boogie Nights thing. I just had that on my phone. But then there was another scene in this episode where it's kind of like, Carl goes in to like see the sommelier, and I was like, I want it to be like The Godfather. So I just like pulled all these images from the food and the lighting, and I had a page, and like the art department was like, nobody has ever given us this before. We love it. Like, I think it just depends on your style. And so for me, it's just how my brain works. Some people might be like extra work, but I just like to prep so much and then throw it away because it's gonna all change. But now I like know what I intentionally want. I'm being flexible to pivot.
I have a question more towards your earlier career when you started all of your short films and you were making films that were about more diverse content, and you were here at Santa Barbara, which is like, isn't a diverse specific festival, and how did you like navigate like presenting to them or your cover letter? Like, how did you get them to see value in not just having the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, Santa Barbara was tricky. That's my hometown. So I was like, I'm a hometown girl. But that did go, that short did go to a couple festivals. And that short was, again, for a thesis film. Like, I shot it in Karachi, like I did it cinema verite style. It was like in a foreign language. So it was like a little bit more like, oh wow, this is different than your normal thesis film. It also like was a good way to band-aid some of the weaknesses of it. Like some of the actors, it's like better, easier to read when you're like, oh, these kids can't act. But I think it would have done better now. I honestly do, because I think people were like, oh, it's fun and different, but I don't think there wasn't as much of an appetite then, because I shot it in 2005 and it came out in 2009. But that being said, what was interesting during that time is during that writer's strike, a lot of the studios didn't know what to do. So I remember the CW casting department reached out and they were like, we have nothing to do, so we have been tasked with just meeting new talent. So they saw my thesis film and they like brought me in to talk to me. Like, it's so random. And they were like, we're watching people's thesis films, and so we're just meeting people. And now my brain, I can't even remember her name. She connected me to so many people that I like did stuff with. And she was like, we literally have nothing to do because nothing is shooting. And we're just meeting people out of film school and watching short films and meeting people. And that's like what our department has been tasked to do at the CW. And so it was like a weird connection.
Do you feel like the landscape, like since you started to now, like do you feel like the landscape of directors from underrepresented groups or female directors has changed? Do you see a dramatic change?
Yeah, I do. I think it's like incredible. I think it's like people feel like I should be telling my story. We haven't seen those stories, so I want to tell a story. I want to help other people tell stories, and so I think like I'm so involved in like South Asian communities and like it's been really great. I think during the pandemic there was an explosion of like we should all just like help each other and like support each other, and I really do truly feel like that's happening in a real way.
Awesome. Yep. Go ahead.
This is a question to help the directors. How did you get your reps?
So here's the thing, I got my lawyers first, which I feel like is like something nobody says. So my thing is I was doing shorts for Sprinkles, and somebody saw my Sprinkles shorts, and Mar Vista Entertainment, I had a friend that worked there. She's like, would you ever want to direct a movie? And I was like, yeah. And so you hear that all the time, whatever, it doesn't work out. She sent me a script, it was bad. I was like, ugh, this is bad. But sure, I'll do it. And then it turned out that the shooting dates were at the same time I was shooting one of my own shorts that I had done in a long time for myself. So I passed on it. She's like, well, if there's something you've written, why don't you direct? Why don't you send that to us? I lied. I was like, oh yeah, I have a script. I got a friend and we wrote a script in a month and then sent it to her, and they're like, we want to buy it. So at that point, I was like, okay, I know I need someone to look at the contract. So I just threw the net out to my friends, and I was like, who has an entertainment lawyer that can look at this contract? So 2 different people said the same lawyer, who I still have now, and he was like, okay, cool, we'll like rep you, so I have them sent. So he was like, we'll rep you, and made no money on it. And from there, they helped me I met CAA, and then it was basically like, you can get a lawyer first. So I think it's like asking your network of friends. It's like making stuff, meeting people at festivals. But I think sometimes it's hard to get reps. Everybody has such a different story, and there's no one path. But I think it is like maybe having something that can sell and using that, because that's what I did with that movie was like, at this moment, I have something that is for sale. How can I get somebody on my team? And so I went the lawyer route first. And then because they have so many clients, they like knew who to introduce me to at agencies.
And then as part of our program, like the writers program and the directors program, we have, as part of the curriculum, an introduction to managers and agents. Like a couple of them in the writers program were not repped at all. And then by the time like we've done the program, they're all repped. So it's just, again, it's just making sure that we are giving our creatives access, and making sure not only do they get access, but there is a job at the end. We don't guarantee our writers jobs, but once the program ends, I put on my talent manager hat and then try to get them staffed on our shows.
I was thinking another thing that's good to do in what I did, IMDb Pro is great, right? If you have IMDb Pro, you can So you can look up people, you can see who reps them, and then you can be like, okay, this person had this movie in this festival. Do they have a rep? Do they have a thing? And so like that was always a really good source of information to be like, who do I know that has the reps that I want to have? Will they give me an intro? Like how can I get to them? You know, it's always figuring out like what are the connections that you have to the people that you want to get to.
Like like half of the business is the creative part, like the other half is the networking and just staying on top of making connections, because the person you meet, like we were talking yesterday, the person that you meet like at a film festival could be the person who's like, helping you get a job on an episodic TV, directing.
Yeah, I was saying like it has to be authentic, right? Like it has to be who do you truly connect with? And that has been the real beauty for me is like people that I met when I worked at Sprinkles, I'll run into them now and I'll be like, oh my gosh, like, and so it's like you just never know if you want to work with somebody or connect with them. It might be next week, it might be next month, it might be 10 years from now. And so I'm always like, yeah, we'll work together in some capacity, I know, at some point. And like that really is like making sure and all the shorts I've done, I've collect people. I'm like, you're never getting to leave me now. So come and join my fun circus. And so yeah, I just want to make cool shit with cool people that want to change the world.
Exactly. The thing that I always tell my writers or my directors is, don't be a dick. Like you'll meet that person, in 10 years who will either help you get the job or remember that you were a dick. So, and not get you that job. But yeah, it's, and another piece of advice that I always tell our creatives is help me help you. I have like 60 writers, 60 directors that I'm trying to find jobs for from like the 2009 class of the writers program. I can't read your mind, but if you say, I just saw this on Deadline, it's an NBCU show, how can you get me on that? You're top of my radar with that email. So I will get you a meeting, I will get you connected with the executive producer or with the showrunner, et cetera. But like, again, it's help me help you. Awesome. So that is our panel for today. If you want to know more about our programs, you can visit NBCUniversalLaunch.com, which is our website. Our Instagram is NBCULaunch. How can they find more about you?
I'm a big Instagrammer, so you can find me on Instagram. I post on there a lot. I'm just Maureen Bharoocha. And I do want to say I'm just so grateful to have been in the launch program. It really did, after all the work I had done, it was like an access that even my agents like didn't give me. So it's such an incredible program, and it really did change my life. So I'm so grateful to have been a part of it, and still continue to be.
I always tell them, like, once you're in the family, you're always part of the family. So yeah, it's...
Yeah, you're not getting rid of me.
You won't get rid of me.
I'm collecting you.
And if you want to watch the episodes of Grand Crew, they're all streaming on our streamer, Peacock.